The night was quiet at the secluded countryside estate of Richard Calloway, the billionaire CEO who had built his fortune from the ground up. The grand mansion sat in isolation, surrounded by lush forests and rolling hills, its only company the soft whisper of the wind. Inside, Calloway's family had just finished dinner, and the house seemed peaceful, calm, as if nothing could disrupt its serenity. But fate had other plans. Without warning, the ground trembled beneath the mansion, followed by a deafening explosion. The sound shook the entire estate, windows rattling and dust falling from the ceiling. The house's lights flickered, then went out. Panic spread like wildfire. Jaden, a 13-year-old orphan, lived just on the edge of the forest. His shelter, a small, makeshift hut built from scraps, was humble, but it was his. Every day, Jaden survived by doing odd jobs for locals, washing windows, carrying firewood, or running errands. He had learned to make do with what little he had. Yet tonight, something was different. As the sky lit up in fiery red, Jaden froze. The distant glow seemed to dance across the horizon, a bright, angry inferno that swallowed the once stable mansion. His heart raced as he stood at the edge of the woods, staring at the flames. He had seen many fires before, but this one, it felt different. It was not just a fire, it was a catastrophe. Without thinking, he sprinted toward the blaze. Jaden's chest burned as he ran, but he didn't stop. The sounds of screams pierced the air, and he knew people were in danger. His mind raced. There was no fire truck, no help coming. It was just him, alone. But the fear in the air pushed him forward. This was his chance to do something, to save lives, no matter the cost. As the mansion grew larger in front of him, engulfed in flames, Jaden dashed to the front of the house, his heart pounding in his ears. The fire was fast, consuming everything in its path. But so was his determination. There was no time to lose. The heat from the flames clawed at Jaden's skin as he forced his way into the burning mansion. Thick, acrid smoke swirled around him, making it nearly impossible to breathe. The roar of the fire was deafening, but through the chaos, he could hear the screams, desperate cries that fueled his determination. He ducked beneath falling beams, his heart racing. The ground beneath him was uneven, the heat scorching the air around him. Every step forward felt like a battle, but he kept pushing, determined to find the people trapped inside. He knew he had no time to waste. Finally, he stumbled into a grand hallway, but the sight before him froze him in his tracks. There, amidst the charred remnants of their once beautiful home, lay Emily Calloway, Richard Calloway's wife, pinned under a collapsed bookshelf. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with panic as she struggled to free herself. Beside her, the twin daughters, Sophie and Lily, no more than 3 years old, were crying in terror, their tiny bodies trembling in fear. Jaden's heart shattered at the sight, but there was no time for hesitation. He dashed over to Emily, his hands shaking with adrenaline. "Hold on, I'm gonna help you," he promised, voice strained but firm. Without wasting a moment, Jaden grabbed the edge of the heavy bookshelf, his muscles straining as he fought against the weight. The smoke swirled thicker, making his eyes water, but he gritted his teeth and heaved with all his strength. The bookshelf moved just enough for Emily to shift her position, but she was too weak to move on her own. She looked at him with gratitude and panic in her eyes, but there was no time to talk. "I can't carry them," Emily gasped, looking at her daughters who were still crying in terror, their tiny bodies trembling in the heat. Jaden's resolve hardened. Without a second thought, he scooped both toddlers into his arms, their tiny hands clutching at his shirt. They were scared, but they were alive, alive because of him. With one girl in each arm, he turned to Emily. "Let's go, ma'am. We're getting out of here." His voice was steady, though his heart was pounding with fear. The smoke made it hard to see, and the crackling of the fire was a constant reminder that they were running out of time. Jaden guided Emily through the wreckage, the floor beneath them unstable, the fire growing ever closer. He moved as quickly as he could, but every step felt like an eternity. His arms trembled under the weight of the girls, but he didn't dare stop. He couldn't. Just as they reached the front door, the unthinkable happened. The roof above them groaned, and with a deafening crash it collapsed, sending a cascade of debris down onto the floor where they had just been standing. The force of the fall sent embers flying through the air, and the intense heat nearly knocked Jaden off his feet. For a moment, everything blurred. But when the smoke cleared, Jaden was still standing. His arms trembled, exhausted from the effort of carrying the girls, but he held on, refusing to let go. He turned to Emily, who had collapsed to her knees, but she was alive. They were all alive. Breathing heavily, Jaden led them outside. The cool night air a sharp contrast to the suffocating heat they'd just escaped. The mansion was now ablaze, but the family he had saved, these strangers, were alive because of him. But as he looked down at the two tiny, trembling girls in his arms, Jaden couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. How could a boy like him from nothing change the fate of a family so rich, so powerful? For now, though, he simply held them close, knowing he had done the impossible. The fire raged on for hours, but as the first light of dawn broke across the horizon, Richard Calloway returned home, his car rolling up the gravel driveway of the estate. His heart skipped a beat as he looked up, his eyes widening in horror at the sight before him. The mansion, once a symbol of his hard work and success, was now a smoldering ruin. The flames had consumed it all, his wealth, his memories, everything. As Richard stepped out of his car, his heart sank even deeper. He sprinted toward the wreckage, fear tightening his chest, and then he saw them, his wife, Emily, and his twin daughters, Sophie and Lily. They were safe, alive, and clinging to one another in a desperate embrace. Tears streamed down Emily's face as she held her girls tightly, and they all rushed to meet him. Richard fell to his knees as he wrapped them all in his arms, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank God you're alive," he whispered, his voice barely audible through the tears. But as he pulled back to look at them, his eyes settled on the young boy standing at a distance, looking as if he was ready to disappear into the shadows. Jaden, his clothes singed and covered in soot, stood there, waiting quietly, his expression humble but distant. Richard stood up slowly, his hands shaking. You saved my family." He took a step forward, his voice filled with disbelief and gratitude. "I don't even know your name." Jaden looked down at the ground, his gaze shifting nervously. He wasn't interested in the attention. "I just did what anyone should," he said quietly, his voice steady but humble. "I couldn't just leave them." Richard stared at him for a moment, overwhelmed by the boy's modesty. He opened his mouth to speak, to offer a reward, to thank him properly, but Jaden shook his head before he could. "No need," he said quickly. "I'm just glad they're safe." And with that, Jaden turned to walk away, leaving the Calloway family standing in the wreckage of their home. His body ached from the effort, but his mind was clear. This wasn't about recognition. It was about saving lives. He had done what was needed, and that was enough. By morning, the media had descended like a storm. News vans flooded the property, and reporters scrambled to interview the family. Word of Jaden's heroic act spread quickly, and by the time the sun was high in the sky, the story had gone viral. News outlets called him a real-life hero, capturing the heart of the nation. "Young boy saves billionaire family from fire," screamed the headlines. And as the details of Jaden's background, his humble life as an orphan, his selfless bravery, were revealed, the public was captivated by the incredible story. But even as the cameras flashed and the praise poured in, Jaden remained out of sight. He wasn't looking for fame or fortune. All he wanted was to know he had done the right thing. The fame would come and go, but what mattered most was that he had saved a family from certain death. The morning after the fire, Jaden had returned to his small shelter in the woods, his thoughts a whirlwind. He couldn't escape the images of the Calloway mansion burning, nor the relief in the eyes of Emily and her daughters when he had saved them. But what really lingered in his mind was Richard Calloway's words, "You saved my family." Jaden had done what any person would do, but something about the way Richard had looked at him, something about the gratitude in his eyes, made him feel like maybe, just maybe, things could be different. As Jaden sat in the small, makeshift shelter, he heard the sound of expensive cars approaching. His heart skipped a beat when a convoy of sleek, luxury vehicles pulled up outside. The dust swirled as the cars came to a halt, their polished chrome gleaming under the afternoon sun. Out stepped Richard Calloway, looking every bit the powerful businessman he was. In his hands he held a thick envelope, one that seemed out of place in this humble setting. Richard's eyes scanned the shelter, then landed on Jaden, standing at the entrance, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Jaden," Richard called out, his voice calm but carrying the weight of his earlier emotions. "I need to speak with you." Jaden's heart raced as Richard walked toward him, the sound of his footsteps on the dirt path growing louder. What was this? What could the billionaire possibly want with him? Richard extended the envelope to Jaden, his eyes filled with purpose. "I'm not here to offer you money," Richard said quietly. "What I'm offering you is a future." Jaden hesitated, his mind racing. He had no idea what this was about. Richard opened the envelope, revealing legal documents. "These," Richard said, "are deeds to a property, your property now. I've arranged for financial support, and I've set up a full scholarship for you to attend school. Everything you need to build your future is in this envelope." Jaden's hands trembled as he took the papers, his eyes scanning the contents. Property? A scholarship? Financial support? He couldn't understand. This wasn't real. Why would someone like Richard Calloway, someone with so much wealth and power, offer all this to a boy like him? Richard looked at Jaden with a soft expression, his voice thick with emotion. "I grew up poor," Richard admitted. "I know what it's like to feel invisible, to feel like no one cares. But when I was your age, someone saved my life. They didn't have to, but they did. And now I want to give you the same chance. A chance to build a life, to live without fear. You deserve it, Jaden." Jaden's heart skipped a beat. The man standing before him, this wealthy, powerful CEO, had once been where Jaden was. And now, Richard wanted to give him everything he had never dared to dream of. Jaden stood there, stunned, the weight of the offer sinking in. The documents felt heavy in his hands, but so did the reality of what they represented. A future, a chance to change his life. Tears welled in Jaden's eyes as he looked at Richard. But why? Why me? His voice trembled. Richard's gaze softened, and he placed a hand on Jaden's shoulder. Because you saved my family, Jaden. You showed me what real bravery is. You deserve more than the life you've been handed. You're not alone anymore. Jaden stood there, overwhelmed. He had lived his entire life alone, an orphan with no one to rely on. But now, this man, this stranger, was offering him a chance at a future, a chance to become something he never thought possible, a chance to belong. With a deep breath, Jaden looked Richard in the eye. For the first time in his life, he felt like he wasn't invisible anymore. I'll take it, he said softly, his voice cracking with emotion. I'll take the chance. Richard smiled, his eyes filled with pride. Then welcome to your future, Jaden. And just like that, everything changed. The transformation in Jaden was undeniable. Just days ago, he had been a 13-year-old orphan struggling to survive. Now, in a crisp, well-tailored suit, he sat confidently beside Richard Calloway at a press conference, his eyes calm but filled with purpose. The once hesitant boy was now the adopted son of one of the wealthiest men in the world. Flashbulbs popped, and reporters crowded around, asking questions about his heroic act and the unexpected turn his life had taken. But Jaden wasn't interested in the spotlight. His focus was on the Calloway family, the family who had shown him what true love and support could be. Later that day, Jaden visited the small shelter he had once called home. The familiar ground felt foreign now, a stark reminder of everything he had endured. He stood in the exact spot where, just days ago, he had witnessed the fire that changed his life. He could still see the smoke rising in the distance, hear the crackling flames that had threatened the lives of the Calloway family. Jaden's eyes softened, and he whispered to himself, I never thought my life would change like this. His fingers brushed against a photograph he had kept hidden in the back of his shelter, a picture of his late mother. The memories of her words echoed in his mind. One act of kindness can change everything. Those words had never felt truer than now. The scene shifted, and Jaden's smile grew as he walked out into the lush garden of his new home. The twins, Sophie and Lily, were running around the grass, their laughter filling the air. They looked up at him with joy, their tiny hands outstretched, and Jaden joined in the game, running and playing with them as if nothing else mattered. The camera zoomed out, capturing the trio in the sunlight, a peaceful, loving scene in direct contrast to the flames that had once threatened their lives. Closing message. He saved them, and in return, they saved him. Sometimes, a single act of bravery can change your entire destiny.